The Connection Gathering, inspiring hope, health, and healing. Connecting the dots of your story to transform your life. Connect with us on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Well, welcome today to the show. My guest today joining me from Branson, Missouri is Cindy Thomas. Welcome to the show, Cindy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, we are so excited to begin this new journey here at Axe Media, the Connection Gathering to inspire hope, health, and healing in the world. And today launches our first show with this amazing guest. So we want to jump right in so you don't miss one opportunity with Cindy. So Cindy, if you wouldn't mind, could you take us on a journey back into your childhood? Because we believe that when Jesus walked the face of the earth, he loved to share stories, accounts, and parables so lives could be transformed for the audience. So take us back to little Cindy growing up and share with us the good, the bad, and the evil so that we can have the audience lives transformed today.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. And before I go back to little Cindy, there are a couple of more recent things that kind of catapulted me toward little Cindy. So I will get things connected a bit here. But my dad passed away a little over a year ago in October 2021. And he had outlived my mother, my stepmother, my sister. So that left me as the last person in my family of origin. Logically, I was cool with that. My dad was ready to go. He was 95. He loved Jesus. He was a World War II South Pacific Marine, had been raised on an Ozarks farm, hardworking, poor parents. And there's no reason I, wouldn't have wanted him to pass. He was much better off. I expected to feel lonely. I expected to feel some regrets about, there's always times when you don't get along with your dad. I was not prepared for all the layers of grief, though. As I went through his personal effects, those kinds of things, I found myself angry and frustrated. And I was rehashing things and people both more recently and a long time ago that contributed to how I was feeling. And I understand this is normal. I didn't like being angry, though. I didn't want to carry that around forever. So I reached out to a counselor, joined a grief share group, and the hospice counselor was very helpful. So those have all really helped. And I just have to say, through it, God has been with me. To go back just a bit, a couple of years ago,
let's pause for a moment so people can take that in a little bit. You might come back a little bit.
Sure.
And so I too lost my father and my sister 2 days apart from each other in September of 2020.
Hard.
Yeah, my sister with cancer at 68. My dad was 94, and we think he died of a broken heart. So for the audience listening in, just to pause a moment to connect the dots of your own story of grief, there are the 5 stages of grief.
Yes.
And so they're not all in order. They come and go in different places, from denial to anger to sadness. And what are the other 2? Do you recall? I know
is there guilt?
There may be guilt.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's 5 stages. I know that for sure. But they come in and out. So you experienced the anger coming through and the sadness, of course, coming through. Did you go through the guilt, or did you go through any of the other stages you can recall?
I did go through the guilt, and there was kind of a reason for that because of the circumstances for the last couple of years, which we all know what that was, right before he passed. But let me back up just a little bit more. I was given a book by my son. He enjoyed this book. It was a basic book about the Enneagram. And he thought he had me all figured out. And then he and his wife found the book helpful, so they gave us one. And as I read that book, that's when I started back to little Cindy.
Okay.
because I I realized I could make myself any of those numbers depending on who I was trying to please.
Mm.
I was a caboose baby. I was born 9 years after my sister and a few years after my parents had a miscarriage. My dad had a good factory job after the war for a little Ozarks farm boy who grew up, taking mule wagons full of wood to sell for 50 cents. A good factory job was a great improvement. He was fairly prosperous, had a nice new 57 Chevy turquoise, and my mother and sister wore nice clothing. My mother had insisted that my dad attend church with her. And around 1959, he made a real, genuine commitment that I have found impacting. Also in 1959, my mother was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and
Mhm.
she had a lot of doctor and hospital events. My sister, to keep me quiet in those hospital waiting rooms, taught me how to read as a toddler. I also learned that you don't want to annoy the ladies in the long black dresses and the funny hats. Sorry, Catholic friends, it was a Catholic hospital. I'm sure they were doing a wonderful job. When I was not there, I was with my aunts, very kind, very loving people, but very busy. You didn't want to mess with them when they were butchering a chicken or using a pressure canner. After my mother passed, right after my fourth birthday, my dad was a hardworking single parent farmer for a couple of years. And
So let's pause for
so
that because
another
that
pause,
so there's it's good to pause. And so let's take that in. You're only 4 years old
4 years old.
and you lose your mom.
I lost my mom.
And so let's pause a moment and share a little bit about what you remember emotionally at that time. Whatever
Um,
you remember, if any.
I remember my mom um, being unable to get up and move around much, but she would have me read to her. She'd call me her smart baby because I could read, not big books, but I could read. Um, I remember her telling me that I was a gift from the Lord after she thought she couldn't have another baby.
Mm.
I remember my sister working very, very hard and probably stifling her emotions. She was 13 when our mother died, and she had to jump right into what a farm wife would do as a teenager. And it didn't make for the best communication between my sister and my father, unfortunately. And that left me kind of in the position of really loving my sister, really loving my father, but they were not always communicating well. So I kind of felt like I didn't want to make any more waves.
Mhm.
Um, but it was not as hard as it was later when I began processing what I had missed.
Okay.
So,
So let's go forward. So your mom dies, and you
um,
started talking about your dad a little bit there.
yes, he worked hard. He remarried. Actually, my mom's remaining unmarried younger sister became my stepmother. Another very
So
godly
your
woman.
aunt became your
My
step.
aunt, my biological aunt, that's the grandmother my kids know.
And how old were you when they married?
Six,
So two
so
years.
two
Yeah.
years.
Hmm.
And communication never really improved much with my sister. She moved out as soon as she graduated from high school, but I had a good relationship with my dad. I truly appreciated my stepmother, which was another difficult area of loving my sister. But I really did love my dad and appreciate our stepmother, and so there was tension. But I made a commitment to the Lord also in elementary school. My father walked me to a little church altar and prayed with me. I had a few derailments, close calls, high school and college, that kind of thing. But thanks to a young adult Bible study, um, some other good influences, I did okay. I married a Christian man.
So what were your derailments
Um,
that you feel?
dating a couple of people that would have been disastrous, and got back from that just in time. So
Mhm.
that was the main thing. Really needing to be careful about relationships.
Mhm.
Um, my husband's family were believers and kind people. They had some issues with finances that I didn't know about until much later, and that impacted some of our finances, mainly not being cautious about debt. There were also a couple of people in his family who were a little bit, dare I say, snobbish spiritually, like they were up on this extra high plane and the rest of us were struggling somewhere below. So I spent some time trying to keep my mouth shut about that.
So with the finances that were in the in-laws' life, and then they started to flow into your family as well, you and your husband, because of the habits he had learned through his parents. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, and I'm not being paid to say this, but Dave Ramsey probably saved our marriage and helped us get back on track.
Well, and I paused on that because I remember Susie Ortman. Do you remember Susie
Yes,
Ortman?
I do.
And she talked a lot about this. And one of the things Susie Ortman said that I'll never forget is she said, "There's nothing wrong when you're dating someone and you feel like it's moving towards a more serious relationship to have part of your dating experience say that you want open books to their finances, their bank account, and their credit rating."
Yes,
And she said, and she mentioned, many of us think, oh, those are personal things. You would never ask somebody you're dating. But if you're dating and you're moving towards a serious commitment of marriage, and you're going to open bank accounts
yes,
together as husband and wife, you don't want to ruin your credit rating if you have a good one. Now, if your credit rating's poor too, I think it's important for the man you're going to marry that he knows what your finances are as well. So I think
yes,
having an open book of
exactly.
finances is critical in a dating relationship.
Totally agree. And as we were trying to rebuild, the 2008 housing market crash hit. I got cancer.
Mm.
Um, and then, so with those things going on, when our stepmother passed away, my sister stepped in to take care of things.
And how old were you when she died?
Um, this was only 12 years ago, so 2010.
And she stepped
And
in to take care of what now needed
my
to be.
sister needed to get her name on my dad's finances, be there in case something happened to him. And I didn't want my horrible, issues showing up, even though we were rebuilding. Those were still in our history. And
Okay.
so my sister took care of things. Um, I tried to be involved, visiting when I could, calling often, and that kind of thing. Uh, we we bought a small we bought a small acreage and lived where my husband could commute to work. But I felt like,
We have a cell phone ringing in the background, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. It may be our producer. He walked out of the room.
oh,
Well, let's pause for just a
sure,
moment there so that we don't get interrupted. So,
sure,
so we're going to pause on that end of the story for just a moment. Well, it just went off.
okay,
So let's go back now to what you were saying. Sorry about that.
yes. Um, so my sister was kind of taking care of logistics with our dad, had her name on his house, those kinds of things. Um, while we were still rebuilding, I had a good full-time job in Springfield. Then there was this horrible night in 2016. It was raining, lived out in the country, bad cell phone service. Went out and stood in the rain to learn that my sister had died. She had an aortic aneurysm.
Mm.
Her stent failed. So
How old were you then?
this was 6 years ago.
Wow.
So 2016, and all of a sudden, overwhelming amount of responsibility. I My brother-in-law and nephews, of course, were blindsided. They were devastated. Then I ended up having to get involved in my dad's affairs after all because there was no one else to do it. That all took a few days. um, to get done. And when I finally got back home, my father in law had moved in with us. He and his wife, my husband's stepmother, had were in the process of a divorce, and
Oops.
he needed a place to stay, meals, and a place to store a van load of stuff
Mm.
until he could get his finances in order and get his own place. I, the short story is I was overwhelmed. I had a full time job. I had an elderly parent in my home. I had another one I was very concerned about. My husband is a wonderful, hardworking man. He was teaching school, so he didn't have a lot of spare time to contribute to this. And I couldn't really confide in my husband because I didn't want to complain about his dad. Um, but amazingly, during this time, and this is where I get to the God is good part, I felt a real burden in my spirit to be more faithful in my early morning time with the Lord. Devotional time, quiet time, Bible studies, prayer. And God met me there. And I realized it was God's grace to kind of not let me rest about that. I kept running into reminders that this needed to be a priority. And what was to come was 2 years later, 2018, we had intended to get up and go meet my father for uh, church at his church in Arkansas, and he wasn't there. And I'm thinking, oh. Well, sure enough, oh. The night before, he had fallen in his kitchen on his way to take his medication. And it kind of started a series of issues. I quit my full time job. I tried to keep him in home care while still keeping my own home up. After a couple more ER events, I admitted I was licked, got him in long term care, and then COVID hit. I had transferred my father to a beautiful faith-based facility, just a wonderful spot. They did the best they could within health department rules to keep him socialized, delicious food. It, but I had to observe the distancing, the masking.
Did they make him get vaccinated as well?
They did not.
Oh, that's good.
They did not.
Well, that's good. That's praiseworthy.
It is. I had power of attorney and I did not have to sign off on that I was just like, I don't feel good about this. And that meant that I had to be more careful with distancing and masking to keep the health department off my back.
But you felt really sad that you couldn't see him.
Yes. Our visits were not good quality with masks and distance, and my dad's hearing not being what it used to be.
And what happened? So in between all this, what happened with your father-in-law living with you?
He found his own place, did okay for a while. Then his health started declining. He moved in with my sister-in-law, and he actually passed before my dad did.
Well, one of the things you mentioned, thank you for sharing that. One of the things you mentioned that we kind of went over really quickly, and let's go back to because it's imperative with your dots, is your cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
So let's go back to you and your health, and what were you diagnosed with, and how was your treatment and healing for yourself?
I had colon cancer, which I always thought was for old people, so there's that. But it was directly related to stress, and that my doctor did tell me that because my other general health was not bad.
Well, the number one cause, though, for colon cancer, for those listening, and I think you and I have talked about this, is genetic celiac disease. And genetic celiac disease, many times when you go for the traditional testing for gliadin, comes back with a false negative reading saying you don't have it. But about 6 years ago, the University of Chicago Celiac Research Department created a genetic blood test. And so what's great about those is you can take those even if you're not eating gluten, and you can find out if you have the gene in your cells. because the number one cause for colon cancer and lymphoma is celiac disease. But I want the audience to know it's not wise to just go gluten free. So let's go back. So you got colon cancer.
Yes.
So did you need surgery then as well?
I had surgery. I have a little bit less colon than everyone else, but God has been good. I have been able to adapt. And related to what you're saying, Jill, I have made some dietary changes that have been beneficial. I am very careful about realizing what foods are inflammatory for me and avoiding those. As far as the gluten, I did not go gluten free, but I try to use only heirloom, non hybrid grain sources.
And that's been
And
helpful.
that is very helpful to me. And so I have to say I am grateful for a good health journey from that point.
Hmm.
Um,
Now, did you have to do any other treatment for your cancer besides the
I
surgery?
I was supposed to do 6 months of chemo. I actually bailed after 4 because I felt like I was having more issues with it, brain fog, a little bit of nerve damage, and I just decided I was done. Um,
And it's never spread.
and it has not spread.
Hmm.
So that was my journey. I don't recommend that everyone bail on their chemo. That's a personal decision between you and God and your care team. My care team actually was fine with it because of my progress. So
So, with all of these dots that you've connected, one thing that comes back, I had heard this years ago that there's a term called codependency in the looking good family. It looks good, it smells good, but there's codependency where children or family members, people might look towards people, places, or things to become more important than themselves, that they tend to lose their identity. So with all of the loss you've gone through, with mom's passing, your sister's passing, your father-in-law, your father now, your cancer and everything, and caretaking, during that period of time, do you and I always it's easy to look at people for codependency, but places might be church or work becoming more important, and things might be food becoming more important, overspending, shopping, gambling, pornography, drugs, sex, alcohol, anything of that nature, anything in life, either not eating enough or overeating. Did you go through any codependency that you can see where at times you were always caretaking and not thinking of yourself?
I felt like that had to happen a little bit during that time when my father-in-law still lived with us. My dad was trying not to be needy to the point that he should have asked for more help than he did. I was trying to work full time, and I did not really adequately process the loss of my sister. I and even at that time, because of distance from places, living out in the country, then moving to be closer to my dad, we didn't even really have a good church connection going yet. I have to say, God has been so faithful through the personal personal devotional time, led me to some great books, led me to some wonderful resources, and those have actually turned out to be beneficial later in the journey, as
And
I'll
what were some of
mention.
those you can mention to the audience that might be
Yes.
helpful for grief or loss or
um,
codependency, any of that?
grief share groups are awesome. It's a safe space.
And where did you go to that?
I went to that at a church in Branson,
Hmm. Do you
and
know the name of
it's
that?
Grace Community Assembly. They
Okay.
have an on-staff counselor,
Okay. And
and
I go to Woodland Hills, and I know they have a grief share there as
yes,
well.
there are several churches in our area that offer grief share. So grief share was good. Um, I did visit with the counselor there at Grace
Mm-hmm.
also. Personally, I found a lot of healing through some online Bible studies and some books. I can't recommend the book Get Your Life Back by John Eldridge. Can't recommend that highly enough because it talks about some of these journeys. Proverbs 31 Ministries. That's my go to for regular daily devotions.
Hmm.
And some of their online Bible studies have been very helpful. So it's like God puts some resources in my life. And in fact, I'll mention one specific one. After my father died, I felt guilty. I was, oh, if only I could have kept him longer at home, all that. I was very angry at the CDC, Dr. Fauci, China, anything I thought had anything to do with COVID. I was angry
Because you missed that seeing him, and
because
that was a time that you didn't get a chance to really
yes,
connect with him.
the visits were not as good
Hmm.
quality
Hmm.
because of that. Um, and I was very angry at my father in law for being there and being needy and demanding. Well, he was an older man too, and I couldn't tell my husband this at the time because it was his dad, and
Did you feel resentment towards your husband too, that you couldn't?
that kind of crept in.
That crept
And
in.
that is something where the counseling and grief share were huge because they helped me find ways to communicate those things.
With your husband.
Yes, and we
Hmm.
were able to move forward. But I want to mention one specifically, Jill, because it was at your house. You had a little gathering, a
A
retreat,
burden release
and
retreat.
we carried this rock around. Well, you may remember that my rock was unforgiveness. And I got tired of carrying that rock. I mean, I had to eat with it and I had to take it to the bathroom. And when we put that rock into the bucket and I got rid of that, I thought, this is what I've been doing emotionally with unforgiveness toward COVID related stuff, toward my father in law's needs. I've been carrying it around like this stupid rock. And did your husband take those and throw them in the lake? I'm something.
No, because we use those for the
Okay.
next event. But what they are is I do retreats. I have a business, Braveheart Workshops, where I do retreats. And this was a retreat where you do burden release. And so when the attendees arrived, they had to pick a big rock, and then there was wrapping paper, and they had to wrap it in paper to mask what's underneath it. And so
Covering
many
it
people,
up.
do you remember the color of your wrapping paper? Can you
it
remember
was
that?
it was very pretty. I think
Yeah.
it had some red.
Yeah. So pretty wrapping paper. And then we had a bag, and you had to put your rock in the bag. And throughout the whole weekend, everywhere you went, you had to carry that burden with you to the bathroom, to eating, bring it with you when it was time to go to bed. And it represented how that burden weighs you down.
Yes.
And then at the end of the event, we were able to take the rock, um, the boulder rock, unwrap it, and throw the wrapping paper away and show our true feelings instead of masking them. And then putting the rock into a basket and leaving it like at the
Yes.
cross,
Yes.
and then reaching into a new basket and bringing something in to fill that. So when you're releasing burdens, it's so imperative to bring blessings in.
Exactly.
Do you remember what your blessing that you brought in? I know you left for unforgiveness, but
I left unforgiveness and I embraced what I will call legacy
mhm,
because my father, even though he was human, he was had his frailties like we all do.
mhm,
He was a constant in his faith.
mhm,
And that has been a gift that I've received through when I quit my job, I started writing for the Assemblies of God. And then I've branched out to a couple of other faith based places. I write some devotionals for other places.
mhm.
I write for the Branson Globe. And
So let's pause there a minute.
so
So, how did you get hired at the Branson Globe? Because for those who read the Branson Globe, Cindy's an amazing editor there. So, if you have events or things that you like the community in Branson to know about, reach out, which we'll show a little bit later here in the program, how to get a hold of her. But she's an amazing writer and editor. How did you get hired by them? What was that like for you?
I guess I showed up at the right time.
Hmm.
They We had moved closer to Branson to be closer to my dad, and I was doing some writing for other markets, mainly Assemblies of God. And I picked up a Branson Globe and saw that they needed were looking for another freelancer or someone who could work from home. Well, that's exactly what I needed because the whole point was to be flexible. And it was also during COVID. Every time you turned on any kind of news, it was bad. And I asked our publisher, Rob Doherty, if I could do a little devotional column. I said, non-denominational, not any heavy theology, just my personal reflections, which is the title of the column, on what the Lord is showing me through my Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing how that column, I think people were so looking for encouraging
Mm-hmm.
news. And that column and a couple of other encouraging columns in the Globe have been so popular.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also helped encourage me to preserve my dad's stories. Those have been very popular when I have shared them. Um, Stories about remembering little things that happened when I was a child that showed the faithfulness of the greatest generation,
Mm-hmm.
how they were committed to just doing what needed to be done. And as I've tried to capture those stories, not only has it been healing, but I feel like I'm giving back to those faithful people, my aunts, my dad, my uncles. I do a lot of veteran event writing,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that's a healing thing as well to express gratitude and preserve legacy.
Well, that is such an amazing story, Cindy, and legacy is so important. And just to break into a new segment here for just a moment from what Cindy said. So, one of the visions that AMG has had is the importance of this legacy and connection in community. And so, one of the areas that I would like to begin doing here with AMG is in X Media is starting women's connection gatherings here, Cindy.
Sounds good.
And it's going to be amazing. We're going to start in January because of the holidays. It's kind of hard to start in November and December. And so we'd love to invite women of the community, Branson, Springfield, Bolivar, anywhere in this area. When we do begin these gatherings, connection gatherings, it will be a safe place for you to come together, be seen, be heard, be known with your authentic, brave stories where we can really connect in community. I think in today's world, we really need to come back in community.
We do.
So this will be an amazing setting for all women, from entrepreneurs to those who have gone through drug addiction or alcoholism or sex trafficking or prostitution, any burden you may have. Bring it to the table because we will love on you in the connection gathering groups. We'll be meeting on Sundays twice a month. I believe it's the second and fourth Sunday at around 3 p.m. in the afternoon for about an hour and a half. And so, for those of you, we'd love to start getting an idea, excuse me, how many of you would join us? And so, I'm going to give my personal email. And if you would do me the courtesy of email me at Braveheart Workshops, workshops has an S on the end, Braveheart Workshops at gmail.com, because we would love for you to email us, give us your contact information so I can send you out an email when we do begin these connection gatherings. Um, One other thing we just would love the audience to know is I've had the privilege for the last 9 months to travel with an amazing group of patriots, Cindy, around the country called the Reawaken America Tour with General Flynn, and they've been traveling around. And really, it's such a godly event. We've been having prophetics there in
Wow.
so many baptismals. And we did our last event in Branson, Missouri on November 4th and 5th with 150 people coming and being baptized.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's amazing. And so glory to God. So the next event will be in Nashville, Tennessee, January 20th to 21st. So register now to go to Nashville. To register, go to timetofreeamerica.com and you will find directions how to register. You'll click buttons and you'll text them and they'll call you back. Keep texting them till they call you back. Don't get discouraged because they take in thousands and thousands of phone calls. When you text them and they call you back, make sure you use the promo code Braveheart and you'll get 10% off of your registration. And last but not least, before we close, I would love to ask you, Cindy, in February is my birthday, February 12th. I'm a Lincoln's birthday girl. February will be my birthday. Do you prefer in February to be in icy, cold, snowstorm weather in bumper to bumper traffic? Or would you prefer to be in the Caribbean at a beautiful villa with pristine sand?
I like my snow kind of around Christmas. And then after that, I would probably go for the beach and the sand.
The
Yes.
beach and the sand.
Yes.
So I have traveled to many Caribbean islands, and my favorite of all is the Happy Island in Aruba. So we're going to do a connection getaway for men and women February 5th through the 11th. February the 5th through the 11th. And to know more about it, again, email me at braveheartworkshops at gmail.com. If you go to if you get a hold of us and you'd like to come, because we're right around the corner for Black Friday, we're offering $100 off your registration as a gift to any of our listeners today. But before we end, we'd love to just show on the screen Cindy's bio so that you know how to reach out to her. So we're going to put on the screen now her bio. Has her it will have her way to reach out to her.
Yes.
So to find Cindy, if you have a great story for the Branson Globe, you've loved hearing from her today, and you'd like to connect more with Cindy, please go to her link below and she'll get back with you. So coming back to the show, Cindy. So in closing here, before we end today, tell us a little bit more about, because we're coming to the end of 2022. What do you pray that 2023 will look like in your life and the journey that you see you're going on to keep healing from grief and moving forward in connection and wholeness in the new year?
I see continuing with the things the Lord's already put on my heart that I mentioned, specifically the legacy, continuing to move in the gifts I have for writing. Been asked to speak a couple of times and share, and I think people need encouragement. So I would like to see people moving forward in hope and encouragement. I'm also seeing from a lot of different sources the moving in the prophetic, moving in stronger prayer. And I think the Lord is calling people to that. And so I'm just excited to see how that continues to increase and improve in 2023.
So more war room time, going into the
Yes,
war room and praying
exactly.
with our little notes on and praying up the country and the
Yes.
world.
Just my little personal experiences, I could not have made it through without prayer, without prophetic ministry, without anointed resources. And we're going to need more of those.
So, the tagline on the Connection Gathering is inspiring hope, health, and healing. So, for you, many people in the world look at the word hope as I hope for a promotion. I hope to find that spouse that I've always wanted. I'm hoping for a baby. And so, in the Christian world, hope means a lot different. What does hope mean for you?
To me, hope is it's all those small things that can bring joy, but eternal joy, eternal blessed hope has been provided by Jesus. And just going back to my dad a little bit, he lived that after losing two spouses, after losing so many of his World War II friends. My father's last discernible words as I spent his last day with him, we prayed. I took my little guitar and we sang old gospel songs. His last discernible words were praise the Lord.
Mhm.
And to me, he lived that hope that, yes, there will be great times here on earth, but the real great time is still to come.
hope in Him, and health. Many of us really seek good health, and we look for, the right diet, or we look for the right foods to eat. Um, what does health look like for you today? What does the word health represent for you?
I feel like health is a combination of a gift from God and good choices.
Mhm.
My father lived with cervical dystonia, which pulled the muscles in his neck. God did not supernaturally heal him. I don't know why, but I do know that he provided resources for my dad to still be able to function. My husband, same story. He's a type 1 diabetic, but he's a fairly well managed type 1 diabetic. So I see taking advantage of resources when we can. We can make adjustments in our diet and those kinds of things. I believe God gives wisdom, but again, the ultimate healing when we get to our heavenly home. Those things are going to be history.
Well, and I love the fact that in the Bible it talks about that our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit and to keep it pure. And so for me, I when I'm putting food in my mouth today, I look at my body as being the temple, and I'm saying, will this nourish my body today?
Yes.
And then I feel the last word, healing, has a lot similarities to health. But today, like you talked about the legacy burdens, I think healing has a lot to do with healing our mind, body, and soul
For sure.
so that we can be blessed and receive the blessings of God. So I am grateful that you came on the show today. And I'm hoping for all of you listening today that you will be inspired with the Connection Gathering shows and that they will inspire you to have hope, health, and healing in your lives as well. So, thanks a lot for joining us today on the Connection Show. We look forward to joining with you next Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And we have an amazing guest that will be on our show next week. So, make sure you put it on your calendar now so you won't miss the next episode. Thanks again, Cindy, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
The Connection Gathering. Thanks for joining us, connecting unity in Christ through the Holy Spirit. AMG Broadcasting thanks you for being a faithful listener, supporter, and sponsor. Help to keep our programs on the air, support us, and donate today. To donate, please go to axmediagroup.com. Subscribe to our channels now and don't miss any episodes. The Axe Media AMG Broadcasting YouTube and Rumble channels are below. Please like our social media sites also.